They called it diplomatic pressure. What it actually became was a masterclass in how not to influence a neighbor. On February 12, 2026, Peter Hoekstra, the United States ambassador to Canada, delivered a warning. Buy American F-35s, he said, or face consequences to the defense relationship. The message was clear. The problem was the math. Within 72 hours, the comment sections of Canadian defense channels exploded with a single phrase repeated thousands of times. Why buy weapons from your bully? By the end of that week, polling showed a 19-point swing in Canadian public opinion away from the F-35. The ambassador had just made the Swedish pitch for them. This is the story of how a threat designed to lock Canada into American dependency instead handed Stockholm the strongest argument it never had to make. The timing could not have been worse for Washington. Hoekstra's warning arrived exactly 3 weeks after President Trump imposed new tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, triggering immediate retaliation from Ottawa. The trade war that had simmered for years was now fully visible. Canadian factories were absorbing shocks, American exporters were losing market share, and into that exact moment walked an American diplomat demanding Canada purchase $19 billion worth of fighter jets built in Texas, controlled by Pentagon software, with a maintenance schedule requiring parts approval from Fort Worth. The math was not complicated. The optics were catastrophic. This was never only about fighter jets. It was about who controls Canadian airspace for the next 40 years. In 1959, the Avro Aero was canceled under American pressure. Canadian aerospace engineers scattered to NASA and Boeing. The sovereignty wound never fully healed. Hoekstra's ultimatum reopened it. The last time Washington applied this kind of leverage on a Canadian defense contract, it worked. The context then was different. The leverage then was real. In 2026, Canada had options. Washington was about to discover how many.
The technical case for the F-35 had already been eroding quietly for months. Mission availability rates remained stuck at 55%, well below the 75% threshold required for operational credibility. That meant nearly half the fleet sat grounded on any given day waiting for parts, software updates, or maintenance approval from Lockheed Martin. The operating cost per flight hour stood at $42,000 compared to the Gripen's $8,000. Over a 40-year lifespan, that gap represented $27 billion in additional costs Canada would absorb. The stealth advantage, once the F-35's singular selling point, had been directly challenged in March 2026 when Iran reportedly detected and tracked an F-35 using upgraded infrared systems. The technical foundations were cracking. Hoekstra's warning accelerated the collapse.
Then there was the kill switch problem. Buried in the F-35 software architecture is a reality most defense ministers prefer not to discuss publicly. The aircraft's mission systems, targeting algorithms, and secure communications all run through Pentagon-controlled servers. In theory, those systems require constant connection for full operational capability. In practice, that means Washington retains a veto over how, when, and where Canada could deploy its own fighter jets. The possibility of remote shutdown during a sovereignty dispute is not science fiction. It is contract reality. When Canadian defense analysts began explaining this dependency structure in televised hearings, public opinion shifted violently. Being reliant on a country that keeps threatening you would be ridiculous. That sentence, posted by a single commenter, received 642 likes and became the framing for an entire national conversation. Sweden was offering something Washington could not match: full technology transfer, full source code access, full control over every maintenance decision, software update, and operational deployment. And critically, the ability to build Gripens in Canada under license, creating an estimated 12,600 high-skill aerospace jobs in Ontario and Quebec. The Gripen E, equipped with a Rolls-Royce engine, had already proven itself in the one test that mattered most. In Brazil and Ukraine, countries that needed reliability more than headlines, the Gripen's operational availability exceeded 90%. While American F-35 sat grounded waiting for parts approval from Fort Worth, Brazilian Gripens flew daily sorties, with maintenance handled entirely in-country. The contrast was not subtle. While American aerospace lobbyists absorbed shock after shock, a different calculation was already underway north of the border. Ottawa had read this situation months earlier. The moves Canada made next did not make headlines in Washington. They did not need to. In April, Canada signed a preliminary agreement with Saab to explore domestic production options. In May, Canadian defense officials toured the Gripen production facility in Linköping and met with Brazilian Air Force commanders who provided unfiltered operational assessments. By June, a detailed cost-benefit analysis had been circulated quietly among cabinet ministers. The numbers were devastating for Lockheed Martin. The Gripen deal would cost $14.6 billion over 40 years, compared to the F-35's projected $41.8 billion. Canada would own the technology instead of renting it. And crucially, Canada would never again sit in a room being told what to buy by a foreign ambassador. The tariff designed to punish Canadian steel had instead eliminated the last reservoir of goodwill Washington needed to close the F-35 deal. When Washington issued its second warning in late June, it was not speaking from a position of strength. It was speaking from a position of fear. The Pentagon understood what was slipping away. If Canada chose the Gripen, it would create a precedent. Australia was watching. South Korea was watching. Poland was reconsidering. A single Canadian defection could unravel the F-35's export model, the mechanism that keeps unit costs manageable through multinational orders. Hoekstra's threats had revealed desperation, not leverage. And desperation, once visible, cannot be hidden again. The diplomatic pressure that arrived in February had arrived too late. By summer, the question was no longer whether Canada would choose independence. It was whether Washington had the will or the tools to stop it. Denmark offered a preview of the future Washington feared most. In 2016, Copenhagen purchased 27 F-35s under similar diplomatic pressure. By 2025, Danish defense officials were publicly expressing buyer's remorse. The jets were too expensive to operate, too loud for populated areas, and too dependent on American supply chains for a country trying to maintain Arctic sovereignty. Danish pilots privately described the aircraft as technically impressive but operationally restrictive. When Canadian defense committees invited Danish Air Force officers to testify, the testimony was polite, diplomatic, and quietly devastating. One phrase appeared repeatedly in the transcripts: "We wish we had waited." Hoekstra's ultimatum had given Canada the luxury Denmark never had, the gift of a clear enemy. The question is not whether this shift happened. It did. The question is whether Washington understands what it lost. By framing the decision as loyalty versus betrayal, the ambassador eliminated the middle ground where compromise lives. You cannot threaten a neighbor and then expect them to trust you with software control over their national defense. You cannot impose tariffs on steel and then demand purchases of fighter jets. The logic does not survive contact with basic sovereignty principles. Canada's choice was never really between two aircraft. It was between dependence and control, between renting American technology or owning Swedish engineering, between accepting a kill switch or rejecting it entirely. Hoekstra made that choice easier than Stockholm ever could have. In trying to force a sale, he closed it. The irony will not be lost on historians.
Does Canada value American-backed stealth that may already be obsolete, or Swedish-engineered reliability that has been proven in the only laboratories that matter, Ukraine and Brazil? The answer is forming now in cabinet meetings, defense committees, and public polling. But the deeper question is what this reveals about the next 20 years of North American relations. When threats replace partnership, when tariffs replace trade, when an ambassador speaks last salesman, something fundamental breaks. It does not repair quickly. Subscribe for coverage of the defense and economic recalibrations that rarely make front-page news, because the next move in this story is already underway. And this time, Stockholm is not the only capital watching what happens when a neighbor finally says no.